And we should be live. Welcome everyone. I'm just gonna give it a minute until I can see that you guys are indeed in the chat. Perfect, good. I'm glad it worked because I just had a failed server a second ago. So I thought there was a bug with Prism, but it's all good now. Welcome everyone. If anyone was new to me, if you've just clicked on the replay, if you're watching the replay, you're welcome to skip the next 13 minutes. We've got about 13 minutes before we officially kick off. We'll start at 9:30 p.m. UK time. And welcome again, Linda, Caroline, Janie, welcome everyone. Let me know in the chat that you can hear me properly. Welcome Herbie. So we've got a few minutes before to go. We're just waiting for everyone to connect.
London Steak. That's Steak House.
Hailey. So if anyone was completely new to me, if you don't know what you've just clicked on, this is a live streamed walk in London, in Spitalfields and Whitechapel, a Jack the Ripper walk. We've got about 12 minutes to go. So if you're watching us live, you still have time to go and grab a coffee, a tea, a snack, a pint of gin, whatever you're into. Hi Barry, nice to see you here, and welcome Sandy. And if you're watching the replay, feel free to skip the next 10 minutes if you want to skip the hellos. Now, a lot of you know the drill already. I'm gonna have to test the microphone. I'm gonna be tapping the microphone 3 times. You let me know in the chat if you've heard it. And welcome Sam, nice to see you here. Let me know in the chat whether you've heard the triple tap. If at any point through the tour you start hearing a lot of background noises or wind or anything, it could be that my microphone got disconnected. You've heard it, Linda? Perfect, thank you. Hi, Julie. You've heard it, thank you, Herbie. Perfect, thank you, Caroline. Let me flip the camera around to give you a glimpse of the view already. We won't start right here. I was just down here because it's quite bright and it's nice to start with some light on my face. Because if you start a live and it's very dark and stuff, some people can click away. Now, nothing to do with Jack the Ripper, but this is actually a very interesting piece of street art. Hi Sandrine. The guy that does those letters, you know, those circus letters, his name is Bain Ain. He's no longer anonymous. I mean, he's a friend of Banksy, would you believe? He knows Banksy. And he was a street artist, he was doing illegal stuff. He actually went to prison for a few months, I think. But this represents the irony of street art. So that guy, Bain Ains, the one doing those letters, you might remember through the Obama campaign, Barack Obama used street art. He had a portrait of himself, a bit like street art, that he used in his campaign. And when David Cameron went for a diplomatic visit to the US, you know, when the presidents or the prime ministers, they go and meet one another, they often bring some gift. Well, would you believe David Cameron was like, well, Obama likes street art, so I'm gonna buy him a canvas from a street artist. So he actually bought a canvas from Ben Hein. So that guy that was doing illegal stuff, that went to prison, suddenly is being commissioned by David Cameron to gift a painting to Obama. I mean, that really highlights the irony of street art in general, you know, because it's illegal, but a lot of people love it anyway. Hi Trish, welcome honey, welcome everyone that just joined. Hi Kitchen Save. If anyone was completely new to me, let us know in the chat where you're tuning from. It's always nice to see who's here. talking about Cameron, one day I was by the military barracks. I was on a tour actually, changing of the guards tour, and at the end of the tour we're waiting for the soldiers. I mean, the soldiers are actually on their way, and there's a guy, a costumer, tapping my shoulder, and he's like, "Hey, no, Cameron." I'm like, "What?" "No, Cameron." I'm like, "What?" It's like, "David Cameron." And I turned around, I was like, "What about Cameron?" And he was just there, and I was like, "Oh, hello." He was literally just behind me. He had been to the military barracks for some reason. I've actually met quite a few prime ministers now. I've also met Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. So I think I've got, and when I say met, I actually spoke to them. So I've met quite a few. Right, let's see what time it is. 8 minutes to go. 8 minutes before to officially kick off. Welcome, Marty, and welcome everyone that I've missed in the chat. So we've got about 10 minutes before it's officially, 8 minutes before it's officially time to start. If anyone was completely new to me, I'm Natalie, and welcome Menanem. That's a cool name. Hi Sarah, welcome. And you know what, let's flip the camera around for a sec. We'll actually go towards the starting point. I was just down here because it was quiet, because I like to start with a nice light and a nice sound. But we'll actually start from down there. I'm Marilyn, and welcome again, Linda. It's actually a bit chilly now. It was very warm today. It was a bit mad today in London because there was the London Marathon. Very sunny though, nice for the runners, I guess. But now it's a bit chilly. I didn't take a jacket or a scarf or anything because it felt like summer, but we should never get too excited in April. Hi Mitzi. So we've got a few minutes to go. Just waiting for everyone to connect. It's not too busy tonight. When you come here on a weekday, those pubs are often full of people coming for a drink after work.
I'll go for a run, by the way.
Hi, Tim Lord. Welcome. If any of you were completely new to me, let us know in the chat where you're tuning from.
Live streaming.
I think some girls wanted to say hello.
Live streaming.
I am indeed.
What are you on, Kick?
No, I'm on YouTube.
Can I come say hello?
Sure.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, what are you saying? How many followers you got?
About just under 3,000.
Oh.
Hi guys, how are we all? Have a nice night.
You too. Hi Sam. It's been a while since you've been in my lives. Yeah, well, it's nice to have you back. And welcome everyone. Sorry, the light is, it's actually sensitive to my presence, so it's gone on off. But it's nice when it's on. It's funny because I'm not moving, but the light keeps detecting me. Right, let's see what time it is. Oops. We still have 5 minutes to go, 5 minutes. Yeah, a bit tipsy, I guess. A lot of people have been running all day with the marathon, and they're enjoying a drink to celebrate their achievement. Well, some people might just be having a drink, but most people that are not involved into the marathon, they don't come down to central London on this day because they know it's very busy. Yes, a bit drunk indeed, I believe. But you know, when it is adults, I don't mind. I put them on camera. I don't care. It's when it's teenagers, I don't, because you know, YouTube doesn't really like kids. Well, especially when they're not yours. Oh yes, Janie, you've missed. I don't want to say it on YouTube because I don't want to trigger the algorithms, but you've missed a lot of action with some teenagers threatening to be very naughty on camera the other week. But I don't want to say it out loud because, well, first, I don't want to trigger the algorithms, but also I don't want to give any ideas to anybody watching this. Nobody likes kids. Well, I think some people might, because at least they like their own kids. Otherwise, we'll have a bit of an issue with the future of humanity, I guess. Although one might argue that the planet would do better with fewer of us. Oh, you saw the post? Okay, so you know what we're talking about. So adults, I don't mind. Even naughty adults. Well, especially when they're not wearing balaclava, they're fine. Right, let's see what time it is. Oops, sorry. 2 minutes before we officially get started. And welcome anyone that just joined. Tonight we'll go for a little live walk, a Jack the Ripper walk around the East End of London. We're just waiting for everyone to connect. I always start a bit early to welcome everyone. And of course, this is a live walk, so this is interactive. Feel free to ask any questions you might have in mind, and feel free to interact in the chat. I might not have time to read everything, but it's okay. That's part of the live stream experience. Two minutes. Well, maybe one now. And it is nearly 9:30 p.m. UK time. Hi, Gary. Nearly time, yes. Let's see. I have to touch the screen every time I want to check the time. 1 minute. 1 minute to go. So if anyone was completely new to me, and if you're watching the replay, if you wonder how to join those live, the best way is to subscribe and hit the little notification bell. Because it's fine to watch the replay as well, but it's more fun to watch the live and be able to interact in the chat. Right, it should be time now. Let's see. It is officially time to start. Welcome, guys. And without further ado, let's flip the camera around and let's go for a walk in the East End. Now, I've just said the East End. Technically, we are not quite yet in the East End of London. Let me show you the little sign up there. See the little street sign there? It says Whitegate Street. Right above the street sign, you see a little crest. It's hard to see from here, but it's two little dragons with a St. George's flag. That is the crest of the City of London. When I say the City of London, I mean the city with a capital C. It's only one of our 32 districts, and it's the oldest one. So that's what the Romans created on called Londinium. Today, it is an amazing mix between the old and the new, and it's full of skyscrapers, but it's the old Roman city down that side. Now, it's interesting because the City of London, they have their own police forces. If I was to do a little graffiti on this side, I would have to deal with the London City Police. Down the other side, it's gonna be the Metropolitan Police. Because if you look at the street sign up there, you see Artillery Passage. You don't see the little crest anymore because that's now outside of the City of London. So now it's the Metropolitan Police down there. So if you were to commit a little crime down that side, you'll deal with the Met Police. Today, the two police forces, they communicate very well, of course. It was not always necessarily the case. We'll talk about that in a little while. Now, this little street, it's quite typical of Victorian London. You know, London has changed quite dramatically, really, since Victorian times. And this street really kept its Victorian character. Now, at the time, you'd have to imagine a street like this would be very busy with traders everywhere. You'd have the butchers would be on the street, chopping the meat on the street with the pigeon poo and everything, shouting, being very loud to attract some attention. There were a lot of butchers around here because there were quite a few slaughterhouses. That's interesting though, because of the slaughterhouses here, that meant that if you saw a man late at night with a bit of blood on himself, you wouldn't necessarily get massively worried, because he might be a butcher. And there were quite a few around here. Now, when we say Victorian London, when you say Victorian London, you probably imagine, you know, beautiful horse carriages and gentlemen with a top hat and a cane and a long cape, and ladies with beautiful dresses with tiny, tiny, tiny little waist. Yes, in Westminster. Over here in the East End of London, it was a bit of a slum, really. You had, you probably wouldn't have many of those posh Victorian men. And if they came, they would probably come for what they called slumming. Slumming was basically the activity of going down to watch the poor, like if you were going to the zoo. And if the gentleman with the top hat was to come down here with his wife, very often the wife would be quite close to the wall and the gentleman more towards the middle, because back in the day we didn't have the public sewer yet. So we had those chamber pots, you know, and they had to be emptied somehow. Very often people emptied them through their windows. And we have a couple of expressions that come from there. You know, when in the UK, we often, when we talk about the toilets, we often call it the loo. That's because back in the day, very often people, before to drop their chamber pots in the middle of the street, they used to shout, "Garde à l'eau, garde à l'eau," because the aristocracy, they spoke French for a while. It's basically old French, but it means mind the water. Not exactly water, of course. We are literally talking about human waste. And over the years, it became the loo, the loo. There's another expression that comes from there. Not very polite, but I might as well tell you. You know, when you get a bit intoxicated, a bit drunk, you might say, "I'm shit-faced." You might see where I'm going with that. That's because people that were sober, when they heard the loo, they used to hide away. People that were drunk, sometimes they would look up and they would quite literally get shit-faced. So that's where it comes from. Anyway, those Victorian rich men and women wouldn't come down here very often. This beautiful shop here, that's quite typical of the 18th century. It looks a bit Harry Potterish, really, with those bow windows. Well, I say a shop, it's no longer a shop, it's a little art gallery today. And yes, exactly, kitchen, that would have been made in the chamber pots, exactly. Now, did you guys read or watch Oliver Twist? Maybe the musical or any of the adaptations or cartoons even. You might remember at the beginning of Oliver Twist, Oliver is in some kind of accommodation with all those kids, and he dares to ask for more soup, and then they kick him out. He's actually at the workhouse. The workhouses, they were those accommodations for the very poor. Now let me show you this building. Little disclaimer, this was not actually a workhouse. It was a night shelter, the Crispin Street night shelter. It was actually a Catholic institution, but it worked pretty much the same as a workhouse. You know, they treated the poor in Victorian times almost like criminals, really. You had the deserving poor and the undeserving poor. You might see above the gate there, it reads women. That's because really, when you couldn't feed your kids, if you couldn't put a roof over your head, if you couldn't even sell your body, the very last resort was to come here to the workhouses or those poor houses. You'd have to queue down here, and they'll split the families because they did not want them to have a good time, you see. So that was the entrance for the ladies. At the back, I didn't show you because it was a bit dark, but you had the one for the men. And Oliver Twist was, of course, in the part for the kids, because over the age of 7, you'd be separated from your mummy. And you'd get in there, then they'll force you to bathe into some kind of a barrel of water that would have been used by 50 people before you. Then they'll give you a bed. Well, a bed. It looked a bit more like a coffin, really, where you'd sleep in a room with several others with bed bugs and people coughing and tuberculosis and you name it. And the next morning, you'd have to work 12 hours a day to pay for your night. So that was really the last resort to come to the workhouses. This very institution, some people believe that Mary Kelly, our last Ripper victim, spent a bit of time in there. It's actually debatable. There's absolutely no evidence of it, but there's a nun that claimed that she remembered Mary. Anyway, this type of accommodation, it was already hard to live inside, but you did not want to die inside. Because what happened is that we had a massive demand for human bodies. You know, at the beginning of the 19th century, the only bodies that were given to science were the bodies from the executions. There were some, but not enough. And, well, luckily, very rarely would pregnant ladies be executed. It would happen sometimes, but mainly by accident. And luckily, very rarely were kids executed. Sadly, it happened as well. The youngest I found was 9 years old. He was executed because of arson. But luckily that was really rare. So those bodies would be extremely valuable. So we had a huge problem with body snatchers. You know, those people going to the cemeteries or the graveyards to steal the newly buried bodies to sell them to the anatomist. And eventually the problem with body snatching became so bad that the church decided that the people that died in those workhouses, those poorhouses, those prisons, their bodies would be given to science. But for them it was absolutely horrible because they believed if they had not been buried properly, they wouldn't be able to reach heaven, you know. So for them it was really bad to die in there. Nowadays it is a student accommodation. It's probably about £500 a week. London is a very expensive place to live. So it's a big contrast with what it used to be. This beautiful building here, the Donovan Bros, it sold for over 2 million a couple of years ago. Maybe even more now, maybe 4 years ago. It's a nice place to live because you're right by the city. So if you walked in the city of London, you can even walk there. You don't even have to take the underground. Now the pub across the street there, the Gun, that's the pub that bought the dog. You might remember in Waterloo, I told you the story of Eliza Grimwood, another murder mystery from early Victorian times. That's the pub that bought the dog of the victim because they wanted to attract some dark tourism, really. You know, dark tourism is not new. People already used it in Victorian times. Well, I say it's the pub. It's the same pub, but the pub was a bit further down the street at the time. Anyway, back to Jack the Ripper. Do you know, or do you care to guess? I think a lot of people know because a lot of you have seen this tour before, but do you care to guess how many victims Jack the Ripper had? How many have they killed? I say they because we don't know for sure whether Jack was a single individual. It could have been a group of them. And also we don't know for sure whether Jack the Ripper was a male. As far as we know, it could be a lady. It could be Jacqueline the Ripper or Jill the Ripper. It is possible. We do not have any strong evidence that it was definitely a male. Menon Hem says 5 canonical. Well, five, yeah. Well, the truth is, we don't know how many victims they had because we don't know who Jack the Ripper was. But yes, indeed, most tripologists agree on 5. Personally, I think it might be 6 because there was a victim earlier called Martha Tabram that kind of fits the profiling of the murderer, really. I mean, she was also what we called overkilled. But yeah, exactly, Linda, nobody knows. What we do know is that in the late autumn of 1888, the Metropolitan Police was investigating 11 suspicious deaths. Well, one, they claimed that it might have been a suicide, but that's a different story. But yeah, most tripologists agree on 5. So we are talking, this is Christ Church of Spitalfields. So we're talking about Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Katherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. Did I skip anyone? No. So those are the 5 canonical ones we will talk about tonight. But yeah, it could be more. And let's not forget there were a few copycats in the US as well. Or were they copycats, or could it be the same killer? We just don't know. Anyway, this beautiful church, sadly at the time of Jack the Ripper, the graveyard at night was full of homelesses sleeping rough. Because at the time the Metropolitan Police wouldn't let them sleep on the pavement, they would kick them away. So the only places where those men and ladies could sleep were like graveyards or courtyards, and this area was full of homelesses. Yes, that's a lovely book, The 5 from Hallie Rubenthal, and it's talking about the lives of those 5 canonical victims. And Hallie Rubenthal argues that, you know, for many years people were saying that Jack the Ripper killed prostitutes. Now, it is possible. But the truth is, at the time, the Metropolitan Police always assumed that any ladies out at night at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. were definitely selling their bodies. The truth is, we don't really know for sure. I mean, some of them might have been casual prostitutes, you know, to have a night in a warm bed. But out of the 5, 2 of them had definitely sold their bodies at one point or another. It doesn't necessarily mean that they were soliciting that very night. The 3 others, honestly, there's no evidence. They might have been, you know, but we don't know for sure. What we do know is that the 5 of them would have been alcoholic, and the 5 of them probably drunk at this pub. The last one, Mary Kelly, definitely did the night she was murdered. Now, the 10 Bells, beautiful pub. The connection between the Jack the Ripper story and the pub was so strong that in the 70s they actually rebranded it. They renamed it the Jack the Ripper. But it looked quite bad to have a pub named after a serial killer. So eventually they went back to the original name, the 10 Bells. And let me cross over so we get a bit further away from the noise. And you see the pub, it's got a name, the 10 Bell, and then you've got a little illustration, you know, a little plaque down here with an illustration of a bell. That's because back in the day, a lot of people did not know how to read and write. And you know, we had a pub pretty much at every street corner. So if I gave you a meeting at the 10 Bells and you didn't know how to read, you could check the illustration with a bell. Same if it was called, I don't know, the Red Lion or the Golden Lion or the Swan, or, you know, you have a lot of pub names that are very easy to illustrate. That's why. You'd love to visit the 10 Bells. Well, careful, because it is haunted. You know what, for many years I heard that the pub was haunted by the ghost of Lucky Lizzy. Lucky Lizzy, she's the third victim. You might wonder, if she's a Jack the Ripper victim, why do we call her Lucky? Well, she was so-called lucky because she was the only one that was not dissembled. Most of the victims, their bodies would have been, well, their throat was slashed, but their bodies would have also been cut open from the anus to the breast, and some of the organs were removed, mainly the uteruses. Elizabeth Stride was lucky because the killer, well, we believe, we're not even sure, but we believe that the killer didn't have time, he was interrupted, so he would have run to the city of London where he struck again. That's the night of the double event. That's where we'll finish the tour, actually. But we're not even sure. Some ripologists believe that Lucky Lizzy was actually killed by a completely different killer. And I would tend to agree with that, because Lizzy was, well, she was a bit of a con artist, really. She had made money out of charity she shouldn't have had. So there were a lot of people that had good reasons to hate her. Anyway, for many years I've heard that when you go down to the ladies in the basement, when you wash your hands, if you look into the mirror, you might see the ghost of a tall lady with a green dress. Now, one day in COVID times, I went down to the basement and I thought, oh, I'll take a little selfie to show my followers. That's the selfie. You can see I've got my COVID mask on. I don't know if you can see well on the picture, but it looks like there's a shape, you know, behind me. I don't know what it is. It might be some kind of a double reflection of myself. It might be because it's a fake old mercury mirror, so the mirror looks a bit dirty. So I guess it's easier to have drunken hallucinations. If you go down the toilets today, they've actually changed the mirror, so it's a nice and clean mirror today. But I don't know about you, but I see something. Could it be Lizzy? I don't know. It's actually quite an old pub. It dates back to 1666. Well, not this very building, but the pub license is quite old. So it could be also any other random ghost, you know, who knows. You took a Jack the Ripper tour 25 years ago, Linda. Nice. So you went into the 10 Bells. Cool. Yeah, I wish I could tell. Well, I don't think they would want me to film inside, but maybe one day I should go inside to do a little short video. Anyway, right across the street now, there's not much to see today because it's all a new build, but that was the site of a little street in Victorian time called Dorset Street. Dorset Street was known as one of the most dangerous streets in London. Actually, a few years after the Ripper, it is said that the police officers would refuse to go unless it was 4 officers together. And at the back of Dorset Street, there was a little court called Miller's Court. That's where at number 35, Mary Jane Kelly, or Marie Jeannette, she liked to be called Marie Jeannette. We believe, it's not even sure, but some people believe that she might have been trafficked to France when she was young, and she had managed to escape. Marie Jeannette, she's the most mysterious of all the 5, really. And she was actually much younger as well. Most of the other victims were a bit older. They were in their late 40s when Mary was in her 20s. And she was, well, she was the only victim that was not homeless. So the killer, or killers, whoever they were, managed to get inside of her little accommodation. She had a tiny little room at Miller's Court. And he had all the time he wanted to do his weirdest fantasies. So the crime scene it was a butchery. It was disgusting. She had almost no skin on her face. Some people might say that it was voluntary, that they did not want her to be identified. Actually, you know what? She was killed about 2 a.m. There's a friend of Mary that swears she saw her at 8 a.m. in the morning. Could it be that the body was actually not Mary, and that's why they removed all the skin? Maybe. Who knows? The guts were removed. There was some skin that had been folded and placed on the bedside table. It was a butchery. Now, on a funny note, look at the number over here. This is number 11 and a half. It's a bit like Harry Potter-ish, really. It is the actual address. If you want to send them a postcard, you have to send it to 11 and a half Fournier Street. There is number 11 here. Hi, Tracy, and welcome everyone that just joined. Now, about the Mary Kelly murder, they are actually crime scene photographs. I have decided not to show you any photographs on my tours because, you know, if I was going to be murdered myself, no one would want pictures of their naked, disassembled body to be exposed on YouTube 135 years later. So I decided not to show you, but if you are curious, you can go on Google and find them. And so yeah, Mary Kelly, because of her age and because of the difference in profile with the others, some people believe she was the actual target, the final target. Now, you can see we are on Fournier Street. That sounds very French, Fournier. That's because it is. There are 3 waves of immigration that really shaped this area of Spitalfields. And the first one, it is actually the French, the Huguenots. The Huguenots were the French Protestant. They had to leave France because under the time of Louis XIV, it was extremely difficult not to be a Catholic in France. A lot of them went to Canada or Germany or wherever, and a lot of them came to London, and they settled here. They were into the weaving industry. So that's the first wave of immigration. Then later on in Victorian times, you had a lot of people from the Jewish community moving here. And in the 60s, you had a lot of people from Bangladesh. See the street name up there? It's written in English as well as in Bangladeshi, Bengali language. So that's the local council that writes it in both languages for the local community. So that's quite cool. Now, I said 3 waves of immigration. The last wave, the 4th one, was actually the hipsters. Nowadays, it's a very hipsterish area. And a very expensive one as well. Now, let me show you, I was going to say the site where Annie Chapman was killed. Actually, I won't show you the site. I'll show you another building in the parallel street because it would have looked quite similar. Because 29 Hanbury Street doesn't look anything like it would have at the time because it's been completely destroyed. But I'll show you a building down here that looks very old. Annie, so she's only the 2nd victim out of the 5 canonical ones, but it was already a big deal in the press. You know, the Jack the Ripper murders, really, that was like almost like the first international tabloid sensation. And it was also a great shame for the British Empire because, you know, it really highlighted the dirty, poor sides of London that some people might not even know existed, you know. The picture of London internationally was a bit more glamorous than that. Now, again, this is not the address, but I'm showing you this one so you can imagine. In a building like this, in the poor East End of London, you could have up to 50 people living inside. Because London was so poor that you had a lot of Victorian families living all together, cramped into one bedroom. So there was no space for privacy. Imagine in one bedroom you could have a teenage daughter trying to cook some form of a dinner next to a little brother taking a poo in a chamber pot, next to the parents making more babies. No privacy whatsoever. And the little door in the middle was often left open at night because very often it led into a little courtyard. And there was a gentleman called the night soilman that would come and pick up basically the chamber pots, you know, the urine. And historically, we've done many things with urine. We've used it as fertilizer or in the leather industry, or you can even make detergents and gunpowder even. In the 1880s, it was mainly for fertilizing. So that's why the door was left open, and people would know, the sex workers as well as the homelesses. Now, there was an eyewitness. I don't give too much credit to the eyewitnesses in the Jack the Ripper story because some of them were prejudiced, some of them were maybe drunk. But there's a lady here, her name was Elizabeth Long, the eyewitness. She claimed that she saw Annie talking to a gentleman about 5, I think 5:15, and he said, "Will you?" And Annie allegedly said yes. Now the testimony is actually contradictory with another one, a guy that lived inside. The timing is not correct. But the interesting bit is that Elizabeth Long, that's her name, it's quite similar to Long Liz. Elizabeth Stride, our third victim, was also known as Long Liz. Was she targeted by mistake? Was the Ripper trying to eliminate Elizabeth Long, the eyewitness? Maybe, who knows? Anyway, when Annie was found in the morning, she was the only one that was found at daytime. It was about 5:30 a.m. in September. It's already bright. She was homeless. So she carried with her everything she owned. It's not like if she could have left anything at home. She was missing a couple of teeth, but that's no surprise. She had a fight a couple of days earlier with another lady over a bar of soap. So when I talk about those Jack the Ripper victims, do not imagine them physically vulnerable. I mean, they were vulnerable. I mean, Annie suffered from tuberculosis and she was probably drunk, but those ladies were ready for a fight. And actually the lady that fought with Annie, she was more damaged than Annie. So Annie had lost a couple of teeth, and when they found the body, she was also missing 2 little rings, like fake, like this, no gold or silver or anything. Which was interesting because it's not like if she could have left them at home. She had no home. And we know now, of course, that serial killers often take a little trophy, you know, a little souvenir. And Annie probably would have died quite soon. She suffered from tuberculosis anyway. She's the only one that was not actually poor. She came from a almost middle-class background, but she had left her husband in Windsor because of her problems with alcohol. Some people believe it's completely, I mean, it's a bit mad, but some people actually believe that Jack the Ripper was a socialist doing it for a good cause. It is mad, but, you know, those ladies, one could argue that they were already condemned, that they were going to die of syphilis or tuberculosis, and that Jack the Ripper might have been a socialist that would have done that to highlight the disgusting condition in which those ladies lived. If that was the case, that was very well done because it definitely worked. I don't think it's possible, but it's a weird, one of those weird theories. Anyway, this building here, you might see the little minaret at the top. It's the only building that I know of in the UK in general that has gone through the 3 Abrahamic religions. It used to be a Huguenot church, so French Protestant, and it kind of followed the different waves of immigration of the area. After that, it became a synagogue, and eventually it became a mosque. But because it is a listed building, it's protected because of its historical inheritance. Inside, they still have some engravings in Hebrew. They're not allowed to remove them. So it's a cool building, really. Now, this street today, it's full of amazing Asian food and restaurants and stuff. It's quite expensive today. But was that the moon? Yes, that's there was the moon. Hold on. Yes, so the moon, I was confused for a sec, but yeah, the moon was right on top of the minaret. The moon is there now. It's nearly, well, not nearly, but almost soon full moon. Now, yeah, in Victorian time, this street would have been extremely poor. It was full of what they called dust houses. The dust houses, they were those accommodation for the very, very poor. If you had 4 penny, you could get a bed for the night. Now, that's the type of bed you'd get. So for 4 penny, that's what you'd get. But imagine you'd sleep with quite a few in the same room and all that. If you did not have the 4 pennies, I'll show you what you could get for 2 pennies. For 2 pennies, you could get that. So you'd sleep on the rope. I know it's very hard to imagine that the rope like this would be better than the street. But remember, you couldn't sleep on the street anyway. I mean, not on the pavement. They'll kick you away. So your options were like the graveyards or the courtyard, in the snow, in the rain. So would you believe that was better? To give you an idea, 2 pennies, that was like a big loaf of bread. 4 pennies, that was like that was like a pint of gin. Yes, because they used to drink gin by the pint or by the half pint. It's hard to tell how strong it was, but a lot of those ladies were completely addicted to alcohol and to gin. That was also the price of the job of a prostitute in a dark corner. Well, when I said job, do not imagine penetrative sex. Most of the time it wasn't, because you had so much syphilis that some people would avoid that. But yeah, that would be the type of prices, and that was also the price of a night in a warm bed at the dust house. Well, warm, I don't know, the price of a bed in the dust house. So sadly for those ladies, it was very often a vicious cycle. They'll get their 4 penny, selling their bodies or maybe just begging, and then they'll drink it away, and then they'll end up on the street again. And that's exactly what happened to Polly. So Polly Nichols, our first victim, the first of the canonical 5, she had found herself on the streets. She did not need to be on the streets. She was married. She actually had an accommodation in a Peabody building. The Peabody buildings, they were some of the first, if not the first, really, social housing in London. But to be a resident in a Peabody building, you'd have to be a deserving poor. You could be kicked out for any reasons. And Polly had a problem with alcohol. Her husband was actually having an affair with the next door lady. And Polly knew that if she was caught drinking, they could be evicted. So she abandoned her family. She ended up on the streets, and then in the workhouse, and then back on the street. Then she got a job as a servant, in a posh home, but she couldn't deal with the absence of alcohol. She actually escaped stealing some of the items of clothing with her, which she sold. So she had a bit of money. For a couple of weeks, she actually stayed in a dust house down here. I'll show you. Well, the dust house is gone, but I'll show you the street. And then she ran out of money. Did she end up selling her body? Probably. We don't know for sure. What we do know is that on her last night alive, she came down to the pub here. It was called the Frying Pan, or the Ye Olde Frying Pan sometimes. Today it's no longer a pub, it's a noodles place. But if you looked at the top, it's still quite typical of the old Victorian pubs, you know, the corner like this. So she was at the pub with her mate. She got drunk. And then she was like, I'm going back to the lodging house. And her mate was like, no, Polly, you've got no money. They won't let you in. She was like, let me try anyway. She went down to the lodging house and no surprise, the management said, no, Polly, you know the drill, no pay, no stay. It's not that the guy was being mean or anything, but you know, he had a business to run. It was a business, it wasn't charity or anything. So he said no. And she famously said, don't worry, look at my jolly bonnet, I'll soon get my dust money. Now, that very phrase, she said, has been used to prove that she was a sex worker. That she meant, look at my jolly bonnet, I'm gonna go and sell my body and I'll come back with the money. I would argue that she could have meant anything. She could have meant, look at my jolly bonnet, I'm gonna go and beg because I look cute and I'll get the money. Or she could have meant, look at my jolly bonnet, I'm gonna go and sell it and I get the money. At the time, you could sell any items of clothing fairly quickly. So we don't know. What we do know is that she did not come back with the money. She was found a couple of hours later on Bucks Row. It's not down here, it's a bit closer to Whitechapel station. Now, the gentleman that found the body, his name was Charles Cross, or Charles Lechmere. He had actually two names. He gave the name of Charles Cross to the police. He found the body. At first he was like, yeah, because he believed it was a pile of rags. You know, any items of clothing, any fabric, you could sell it at the time. And as he got closer, he realized it was, oh, thank you, Mark. That's very much appreciated. Thank you so much. Yeah, if any of you drop me a tip on PayPal or buy me a coffee, that's very much appreciated. I don't see them live, but I see them after the tour. You can also use YouTube. It's great as well. Now, Charles Cross, when he found the body, is just looking over the body when someone comes behind him. Robert Paul, I think his name was the other witness. And together they were like, oh, I think she's dead. And they were like, oh, what should we do? Should we go and fetch a police officer? Yes, sure. So they left to go and fetch a police officer. Now, there's actually another police officer that came and found the body again before anyone else was brought. Now, at the time, Cross somehow was not considered a great suspect. Today, it definitely is. Today is one of the main suspects. Some people believe that when he was looking over the body, allegedly finding her, he was actually in the process of killing her. That would explain why they didn't see the blood quite yet, because he would have just killed her. You know, he didn't bleed that much yet. Now, with the Jack the Ripper story, I could go home tonight, watch a new documentary, read a new book, and have a completely new suspect in mind. And some of those documentaries and stuff can be a bit misleading. There was a great documentary a few years ago about Charles Lechmere / Cross, in which they had some kind of a 3D illustration of him completely kneeling over the body. He wasn't. When you go back to the original sources, he was not actually kneeling over. And actually, the other guy, Robert Paul, he said to Cross, should we sit her up? Now, Cross said, no, I don't want to touch her. You'd think if he was indeed the killer, he would have wanted to touch her, to have an excuse to have some maybe blood spats on himself or whatever. So he's a very good suspect, but he's one of the many. He's a good suspect because he was definitely on the crime scene, and he was definitely a local. Oh, thank you, Janie. That's very, very much appreciated. Thank you. It is really thanks to your tips that I can keep going with those tours and everything. Anyway, I did not even tell you how we got the name or the nickname Jack the Ripper. It's because at the time, the police, the press, and the Whitechapel Vigilante Committee would receive a lot of letters and all of them had to be investigated. Some of them were quite frankly ridiculous. Some of them would have come from all the way from Wales. Someone might be angry with their neighbors because they are noisy, and they might be like, oh, my neighbor is nasty, I'm sure he's Jack the Ripper. And the police kind of had to follow up on everything, you know. And there are a couple of letters that the police actually took seriously, like the Dear Boss letter. And anyway, some of those letters were signed Jack the Ripper. So that's how the name was picked up by the press, and that's how it became the official name of the murderer, really. There was another letter that was received by the Whitechapel Vigilante Committee that was half a kidney. And it read, "I've eaten the other half for breakfast, ha ha ha." Now, our next victim, Katherine Eddowes, she was indeed missing her kidney. Most of the other victims, their uteruses were missing. That's why some people believe that the killer had some kind of basic knowledge of anatomy, that he might have been a doctor or a butcher, because he did remove some organs in the dark very quickly. And now the thing is, there was so little forensics at the time. You know, they were hardly even capable of finding out if the kidney was human or not. Actually, the press messed up, because the press published a few days later, yes, the kidney is human and it suffered from Bright's disease. So did Katherine, the victim. But apparently that was wrong. Apparently they couldn't even find that out at the time. And even if the kidney suffered from disease, I mean, if it was a joke, it would have been one of the students in the School of Medicine, and those bodies at the medicine school, they were often coming from the workhouses, where those ladies were often alcoholic and stuff, so they might have suffered from kidney disease, liver disease, and stuff like that, you know. Talking about the School of Medicine, there was an American guy that contacted two of those anatomical schools to buy some uteruses. Quite a good price. Little detail to remember for later. Anyway, we are now on the site of the Petticoat Lane Market. It's not called Petticoat Lane anymore, it's called Wentworth Street today. I think it's Queen Victoria that believed it was a bit too sexy, you know, a bit too titillating to call it Petticoat Lane, so it was renamed. At the time, there was the site of a market, well, still today, but at the time it was a market that was very much a Jewish market, or pretty much all the traders were from the Jewish community. Now, if we start talking about suspects, you might have heard the theory that Jack the Ripper might have been from the Jewish community himself. I'll tell you why people have said that. It's because of the famous non-clue. I'll show you the site in a moment. Personally, I think it's rubbish, but there are a few suspects that are indeed from the Jewish community, simply because a lot of the population here was Jewish. One of the number one is not my favorite by any means, but is a lot of ripologists' favorites. It is Aaron Kosminski. Kosminski, he ticks all the boxes. He was a pervert. He had sexually assaulted his own sister. He died in an asylum. Now that's interesting, because usually the serial killers, they don't stop. They usually go crescendo and crescendo until they're being locked up, or they die, or they move away. They don't usually stop for no reason. So the fact he died in an asylum would explain why it stopped. Although he actually died much later. There was a bit of confusion. There still is a lot of confusion about Kosminski anyway. We're not even sure we're talking about one guy, because there were a few Kosminskis around here. And there was also a Nathan Kaminsky that also died in an asylum. And there was another Jewish suspect that was quite local as well, Jacob Levy, that also died in an asylum because of syphilis. So you know, you've got those type of suspects that they do tick all the boxes. Kosminski had worked as a hairdresser. Now you might ask me, why is it relevant? Because he's good with knives? Well, yes, exactly. Hairdressers, they used to have basic knowledge of anatomy. You know, you'd have a verruca on your face. To get it cut off, you'd go to the hairdresser. They would do minor surgeries. You'd have a teeth to get pulled out, you'd go to the hairdresser. So, you know, they would have some bit of anatomical knowledge, and that's exactly what we believe the Ripper had. Although sometimes I think we give the Ripper too much credit. Yeah, he stole a lot of uteruses and a kidney. With Katherine Eddowes, he took one kidney, one uterus. Did he even want a kidney? Did he maybe want 2 kidneys and he took a uterus by mistake? We don't know, you know, we just give him a lot of knowledge, but we don't know what he wanted. Now, this is Goulston Street. I'm coming down here because this is the site of the famous non-clue. Now, in Victorian times, the building to my left, it was known as Waitrose, it's still Waitrose building. At the time, the vast majority of the inhabitants were from the Jewish community. And see the little doorway down here? That's where a piece of Katherine Eddowes' apron was found. Now, Katherine, she's our 4th victim. I'll show you the murder site in a moment. She's the second one from the night of the double event. Now, they found in front of the doorway here a piece of her apron on the floor. You know, at the time, ladies often had some kind of an apron covering their skirt. Now, there's no doubt that it came from Katherine's apron. There was a bit of stitching that she had actually fixed it herself. The apron, or the piece of apron, I should say, was full of blood and feces. Why was it taken by the Ripper? We don't know. Was it to clean his knife? Or was it to carry the kidney and the uterus he had stolen? We don't know. What we do know is that in the doorway here, inside, so right above the apron, there was a little graffito. I say graffito because graffiti, it's plural. It was written with chalk, and it read, "The Jewess won't be the man to be blamed for nothing." Now, there were 2 mistakes here. It didn't say the Jews, it said the Jewess, Jewes. We don't actually even know whether it said the Jewess or not, because the Metropolitan Police did not want the Jewish community to see it. They didn't want to raise up the anti-Semitism in the area, so they erased the graffito before the city police could take a photograph. The city police was now involved because Katherine was actually found in the city of London. Now, so we're not even sure whether the graffito made a mistake or if it's the police officers that copied it on his notebook that actually made the mistake. Now you've got the Jewess, and it said, "won't be blamed for nothing." The double negation doesn't exist in English. It's a mistake. It exists in many languages, in French, in Yiddish, but not in English. So there's a couple of mistakes there. Now, if you ask me, I think it's a coincidence. I think when you run away from a murder scene, you don't take the time to write a little graffito on the wall. Some ripologists would even argue that it might not have been the Ripper that took the piece of apron down there. It could have been a rat or a fox. You know, it's a bloody piece of apron. They love bloody stuff. I don't know if we had as many foxes in Victorian times as we do today. But today, foxes would definitely do that. Foxes, they keep stealing the shoes, you know. When you leave your shoes on your porch, they like smelly stuff. So they would have definitely done that. And some say that it might have even been Katherine herself that dropped it. That she might have cut a bit of her apron to use it as a sanitary pad. You know, at the time when you were a homeless lady, having your periods could be very inconvenient. So we don't even know. We're just making a lot of assumptions. Anyway, this is one of the longest running pieces of street art here. It's been here for years because a lot of people come here for Jack the Ripper tours. And this is not my favorite piece of street art. Your tour guide is lying to you. the truth is, a lot of us are, you know, even myself, you know, I mean, I'm trying to follow the facts, but, you know, I'm not one to go down to the archives and read the police files. I mainly rely on ripologists that I follow online, and sometimes I could be repeating mistakes myself, you know, so it could happen. Anyway, this beautiful piece of street art there, that's actually two different artists. To the right, it is Zabou, she's a French artist, and to the left, it's Jimmy C. He's originally from, well, I think he's based in London, but he is from Australia. He's studied a lot of pointillism, you know, Aborigine art, and he's developed his own technique with the pointillism, but with a spray can. This is commissioned. This is not done illegally in the middle of the night. This is commissioned, so they had all the time they wanted to cover the wall. Now, we are about to step back into the City of London. Why does it matter? Because now we'll be on the patch of the City of London police. You see, if I show you the little bollard there, you see those little red stars on a white background again. This is a sign that you are now in the City of London. And if you look at the street name up there, Middlesex Street, that's the crest of the City of London. Oh, thank you, Linda. That's very much appreciated. And we were talking about Jacob Levy earlier, the butcher that is also a suspect. He lived right up there. And he actually had a cousin that lived at the back of the Wentworth building. So if indeed he was the Ripper, he could have run into the building to hide. Who knows? And actually, he had been accused of stealing from another butcher that lived right there. So the Jewess won't be blamed for nothing. It could actually be, I won't be blamed for nothing, so now I'll do something. Anyway, that's one of the many suspects. We have so many to talk about. There's one suspect I have to tell you about. Is not my favorite. It's rubbish, but I have to tell you because otherwise you'd be like, oh, she didn't mention the royal conspiracy. There's one suspect. It's a great story, though. It is Prince Eddie. Eddie, his name was actually Victor Albert, because the royals, they choose their names. He was the grandson of Queen Victoria, the first one. So in the line of succession, he was like the little George today. And he was a bit different. Even Queen Victoria, she had some doubt about his intellect. And Eddie was said to be particularly fond of the prostitutes of Whitechapel. There were some very luxurious prostitutes in Westminster, but no, he liked the one from here, the one missing teeth and everything. And allegedly, he would have fallen in love with one of them. And she was a Catholic. That's a different story, but they're not allowed to marry a Catholic anyway. And it is said that they would have secretly married. Exactly. That's the storyline from the movie From Hell. It makes a great movie, but it's not very realistic. Now, the story goes that Queen Victoria herself would have heard about the marriage, the secret marriage, and that there was a baby. Imagine the shame of having, that baby would have been the heir to the throne, of having a Catholic, the daughter of the boy of a Catholic girl, a prostitute, unacceptable. So some say that Queen Victoria might have asked her doctor, Sir William Gull, so that was her personal physician, to eliminate those 4 prostitutes that were aware of the royal baby and the marriage, and that maybe Mary Kelly was actually blackmailing the royal family. Now, you might have noticed I said 4 prostitutes, not 5. I'll tell you why in a second. Because one might have been targeted by mistake. Now, it is a great story and it makes a great movie. If you've not seen From Hell with Johnny Depp, it's quite a cool movie. Just to see Victorian London, it's quite well done. We know it's rubbish. Well, Sir William Gull, he was in his 70s and he had had a stroke. Would he have had the physical strength to target ladies ready to fight like Annie Chapman? I'm not sure. And also, Well, there's another theory. Some people say that it might have been Prince Eddie himself, that he would have suffered from syphilis because of his sex worker's friend, and that he started to, syphilis has different stages. At the beginning it's very genital, and then it kind of goes away, and then you get neurosyphilis, you basically lose your sanity. Now, Prince Eddie, he had an alibi anyway for at least one of the murders. He was having dinner with Queen Victoria in Balmoral, so he couldn't have been down here. And all this theory, it's actually bonkers. It started with a guy in the 70s. He claimed that he was the illegitimate son of Walter Sickert and that prostitute baby. And he actually said later on that it was a hoax, but that was too late. It had been published in the press. And then you had Patricia Cornwall that invested a lot of money into investigating Walter Sickert. And so the story was out, but we know it's rubbish. It's a good story though, so I have to tell you anyway, just because it's a good story. Now, let me tell you about my favorite victim, Katherine Eddowes. Katherine, she was, when she was young, she used to follow the executions with her partner, because until 1868 we still have public executions, and she would write little funky poetry that she would be reading out loud, very often claiming to be the last speeches of the criminals. So she was a bit like a stand-up comedian to me, like a Victorian street performer, and she would sell little chapbooks of the poetry. She was a terrible mother though. I mean, she was an alcoholic. She had abandoned her kids a few times, but let's not forget, she never chose to have kids. Nowadays we've got the option, of course, but at the time for poor ladies there was absolutely no contraception, and this church, by the way, behind the tree there, that is St. Botolph without Aldgate. But at the time it was known as the prostitute church. Because of course prostitution was illegal, but everyone knew that it was going to happen anyway. The police officers knew, the authorities knew. So they had two sets of rules that the prostitutes would have to abide by. First, they could not loiter. So they had to keep moving. They couldn't stay in one spot. And also, they could not actively solicit. They couldn't ask gentlemen. They had to wait to be approached. So apparently, at night over here, you had over 100 prostitutes walking around in circle around the church. So gentlemen would know guys maybe, I cannot say those guys were gentlemen. Guys would know where to find them. We don't know whether Katherine was here to do that, probably not. We know that she had just come back from Kent. She had been with her partner, hop picking, but it was a bad season in Kent. There was hardly any work in the field, so they walked back all the way from Kent. And she split with her partner that night. They had no money, they were penniless, the both of them. So she told him, okay, you go and sell your shoes, and I'm gonna beg my daughter in Bermondsey for money. And we'll meet up again tomorrow or whenever. We know she couldn't have possibly gone to Bermondsey because her daughter didn't want to see her anymore. She never gave her her address, So we don't know who she met. Probably someone that owed her a bit of money, because at about 11 p.m., Katherine was found completely drunk on the street. She was on the pavement making animal noises. We've all been there, right? So she was taken to Bishopgate police station, where they asked, can we get your name and address, please? And she said, nothing. So they put nothing into a cell. She slept for an hour or so. Then she woke up and she was very annoying with the police at Bishopgate police station. She was like, when are you gonna let me go? And she was singing and annoying. And eventually the police said, okay, we'll let you go when you can take care of yourself. She was like, I can do that right now, you old cock. And they were like, okay, we'll let you go when you give us your name and address. And she said, okay, I live at 6 Fashion Street. She didn't have an address. She was homeless, we know that. And she said, my name is Mary Ann Kelly. Now, we know her name was Katherine Eddowes. But Mary Ann Kelly, that is very similar to Mary Jane Kelly, the next victim. So some people have speculated that she might have been targeted by mistake, that the actual target might have been Mary Jane Kelly, and that the police were involved because there might have been Freemasons and stuff. Now, it is possible, but the thing is, when you use a fake name, I actually use Kelly myself when I go. When I go on some dodgy website, if they ask for my name, I put Kelly, not because of Mary Jane, but because at school sometimes the teachers would call me Kelly by accident, because scare you, Natalie, if you cut off the middle, it's Kelly. Anyway, when I use Kelly, I know I use Kelly, so I might use it on many different websites. So because she gave that name to the police, it doesn't mean that she's not given that name to many other people, Usually you use the same fake names, so you remember it's you, if someone calls you on the street or whatever. Anyway, so that's why the theory of the 4 prostitutes and not 5, because Katherine might have been targeted by mistake. Now, she's released from the station at, I think, 12:55, so nearly 1 a.m. in the morning. At 1:15, PC Edmund Watkins came here. Now, we are now on the famous Martyr Square. Martyr Square, the geography of the square has not changed too much. The buildings are very, very different today. I mean, today it's like skyscrapers. But in Victorian times, it was full of warehouses. And that required a lot of police presence around here because it was full of goods from St. Catherine's docks. There was a dock that received a lot of imported expensive goods, wine and tobacco. So the police officers from the City of London would come on patrol every 15 minutes at night. So PC Edmund Watkins came down this way with his lantern at 1 a.m., sorry. Nothing out of the ordinary. 1 a.m. 1:30. What am I saying tonight? 1:30 a.m. Let's get this right. So 1:30 a.m. he comes down here. 1:35 a.m. there's a sighting down here. They claim that they saw Katherine chatting to someone at the corner there of Church Passage. It was, now it's St. James's Passage, but at the time it was called Church Passage. Now, it's interesting to note that that witness was actually a cousin of Jacob Levy. So some people believe that he pretended not to recognize Jacob because it's his cousin. It's a bit far-fetched, but it's possible. Anything is possible, really. So that's 1:35 a.m. 1:45, PC Edmund Watkins comes back with his lantern, and he would have had to come. He would have been sacked if he didn't. It was quite strict for them in the police at the time. He came down here when he saw what he believed to be a drunken lady on the floor. When he got a bit closer, he realized it was a body. It was Katherine Eddowes. Katherine, she's the only one that has a little plaque. This is an illustration of her from the Illustrated Police News, I guess. She had been brutally attacked. Her throat had been cut as well. She'd been disemboweled. A kidney was gone. The uterus was gone as well. The killer had cut off little squares in her cheek and a bit of her hair. If we are to believe the eyewitnesses, we're talking in the space of 9 minutes. 15 if you don't believe the other sighting for any reasons, but still, in the dark streets of London, I have a vague idea where my kidneys are, but if you ask me to remove a kidney in the dark with a butcher's knife on the street in less than 9 minutes, I would never find it. So that's why some people have argued that Jack the Ripper might have been, or would have had to have been, a doctor or someone with anatomical knowledge. Well, yeah, probably, but Again, it could have been a butcher, it could have been a hairdresser, it could have been anybody with a bit of knowledge, really. Now, time to tell you about my favorite suspect. Let me show you his picture. My favorite suspect, it is Francis Tumblety. Now, he's not everybody's favorite, but the reason why is one of my top suspects. He is not originally from here. He's from Rochester in the state of New York. A lot of ripologists would argue that, well, actually, most profilers would say that the Ripper would have had to be very local because he knew the East End like the back of his hand. Yeah, sure, but some people can know an area very quickly. I mean, you know, you don't need to spend years somewhere to know the area. You know, myself once I got stuck in Shanghai because I had a ear infection. I couldn't fly, and it was Chinese New Year, so we had no trains available. So I was stuck alone in Shanghai for a week. When my friend came back to meet me, she was impressed because I was telling the taxi drivers where to go, and I knew my way around very well. I would give her a tour and everything. She was like, "Gosh, how many years have you been here? It's been a week." So yes, some people can find their way around very, very quickly. One of the other arguments against him is that he might have been a homosexual. A lot of profilers would tell you it's very rare that a homosexual would attack women, but he hated women. And actually, he might have been one himself. According to some claims, he was actually born what they would have called at the time hermaphrodite. Nowadays, we'll say intersex. When he died, actually, his mustache was fake. And he was probably had a micro penis. So that could have been a reason to hate women. It's because there was definitely a very, very feminine side to him. Anyway, the reasons why he is my favorite is that first, he was a killer. He was known as the Great American Doctor. He had killed a couple of people in Liverpool. He would, when it moved to a city, he'd post an ad in the newspaper claiming he was curing anything from blindness to anything. And he actually killed a couple of people, giving them some nasty medicines. So we know he's got no regards for human life. Now, we also know that he was arrested in connection to the Jack the Ripper murders a couple of days before the last Jack the Ripper murder, the Mary Kelly's murder. Now, out of all the suspects we've mentioned tonight, he's the only one that was suspected at the time by the police. We don't know why, because the dossier they had on him was lost, like many of the documents in the Jack the Ripper story. One might argue that the police also mentioned Kosminski, but we don't really know which Kosminski. They actually just mentioned the Jew. We don't even know whether it's Kosminski. So we know that Tumblety was arrested. They didn't speak about him much in the press over here, maybe because the police was ashamed of letting him go. They actually charged him for gross indecency. So we're talking homosexuality, but that's probably because they didn't have enough to keep him in the Ripper matters. He actually explained himself. He was interviewed in the US press about why he was arrested as being the Ripper, and he said, "Oh, it's because of my hat, you see." Ridiculous explanation, really. But yeah, the little details there are two details that make me think he's a good suspect, is that he had, there were some witnesses, some people that had been invited into his home in New York. He was quite rich, because he was a quack. He made a lot of money by claiming to be a doctor. And they said they had been invited for dinner where he talked about hating women, and he proudly invited them into his basement where he showed them his collection of uteruses. Now, we have to be precise, that was about 10 years before the murders. So those uteruses he had in jars of glycerine could not be the one from Annie Chapman and all that. But we know he had an interest in uteruses. He said, I've got uteri from every social class, working class, middle class. He probably was doing some illegal abortions. There was a big business with illegal abortions at the time. So that could be why he was interested into uteruses. And remember, there was an American doctor that contacted the School of Medicine to ask for uteruses. Well, one might argue that could also be a motive for anybody else to go and get some uteruses to sell them to the American doctor. Now, the little detail that makes me think, I think it might be him, it's that when he died in New York 20 years later or 15 years later, he was very rich. He had a lot of money, a lot of nice items of clothing and jewelry and all that. It is said that they found in his possession 2 little rings, fake, identical or at least very similar to the one described missing from Annie Chapman's body. Now, it could have been exaggerated, but we know now that the serial killers, they often take a little trophy with them. So could he have taken it from Annie Chapman's body or taken them? Yeah, very probably. So that's why he's my favorite. But again, there's no strong evidence against him, and there's no strong evidence against anybody really. And if dozens and dozens of ripologists and even the FBI did a profiling, and a lot of researchers have not been able to find it. We will never find him. I don't think I want to find him anyway, because we wouldn't be making so many tours if we did have the answers. But yeah, I think he's my favorite. And let's not forget, he was arrested because it's very easy to create a case against any Victorian man, really. And the Jack the Ripper story, actually, you had those victims, yes, but a lot of men were victims because they were wrongly accused. Sometimes even post-mortem, like Lewis Carroll, there were a lot of Walter Sickert as well. There were a lot of men that their reputation was completely tarnished years later sometimes because they were accused of being the Ripper. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. That's gonna be the end of the tour. Fifth ad, Men on M. Well, you know what? It's not many. I actually set them to the minimum. I can choose intense or medium or low. I actually put them down to the minimum so you don't get interrupted too much. But I think that's the minimum 5 anyway. Anyway, thanks for coming, guys. Do come, do tell me in the chat, or do come to London if you can. But do tell me in the chat if you have any questions. And if any of you were completely new to me, if you've made it that far into the video or into the live, you might want to consider subscribing. Yes, exactly. He's buried in Rochester. Some of my followers have sent me pictures of his grave. Whether he was the Ripper or not, he was a nasty man because he killed a few people with his bad medicines. When he was in Rochester, he was known to have a lot of Victorian pornography. I don't want to know what that looks like, but apparently he was selling some kind of porn by the canals. I think you have canals in Rochester. I shouldn't say that word. I think it's one of the words you're not meant to say on YouTube, but too late. Oh yes, thanks, Men on M. Yeah, if you give the video a like or even a hype, it always helps. Right, I don't see any more questions, so I'm gonna let you go. If you want to see a bit more of me, this Thursday we're going down to Fulham, so we've got a few interesting murder cases there, a bit more modern. All of them are much more modern, actually. We're talking about recent crimes. Usually I prefer to talk about older crimes, so we know the families are not watching. Well, actually, having said that, I've had a descendant of Katherine Eddowes that contacted me before. They said they were watching me, but I prefer when it's a bit older, so it's not too close to home. But there are some interesting cases in Fulham, so we'll go anyway. So that's on Thursday, and Monday, we're going down to Lincoln in Lincolnshire. I still have to do a lot of homework for that one. So yeah, that's on Monday. And if you go on my channel, I've got a lot of lives scheduled for May. So do go and hit the little notification bell on any that would take your fancy. Oh, thanks, Pauline. That's very much appreciated. Oh, thank you, Julie. Thank you very much. Anyone dropping a tip, that's very, very much appreciated. It is really thanks to you that I can keep going on all that. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you are new to me, I hope you'll subscribe, and I hope I'll virtually see you soon, hopefully on Thursday, or maybe on Monday, or both. Have a good night, or good morning, a good evening, a good afternoon, whatever time it is for you, wherever you are in the world. And I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.